Mark pulled into his driveway later than expected, dust from the country road settling behind his tires. He stepped out, stretched his back, and caught the glint of sunlight bouncing off something unusual. A silver post hammered deep into the ground near his garage. A stranger was crouched beside it, tapping a metal sign into place. Mark didn't say a word at first, just walked a little slower, eyes narrowing as he read the words on the sign. Private drive, access, authorized, by HOA. The man lean mid-40s, smug as anything, looked up and gave a short nod. Afternoon, he said. Like this was all perfectly normal. Mark stopped just 10 feet away. Who are you? He asked. The man stood brushing dirt from his hands. Leo. Karen said I could start moving things in. I've got the signed approval. Said it's community designated space now. Karen. Leo jerked his thumb toward the corner lot 2 houses down. HOA president. Said this here was a shared easement. Me and the others got access now. Mark didn't reply. He just looked at Leo, at the edge of his yard. That spot had always been his. Mowed by him. Patched by him. Watered by him. And now this man was driving a stake into it. Like he owned the place. From across the street, Karen watched silently from her porch. She had a lemonade in one hand, a phone in the other. Her legs crossed like she had all day. Mark turned back toward his house without another word. Inside, he pulled the blinds shut and walked to the bookshelf where he kept the file folders, insurance, utilities, and most importantly, the deed. He pulled the envelope out, checked the coordinates, then flipped through to the original survey map from when he bought the place. 5 years earlier. He walked outside with the papers in hand, but by the time he reached the edge of the yard, Leo was already gone. Only the post remained, hammered down like it had been there for years. A small orange cone sat beside it, temporary, like it was a placeholder. That night, Mark stood at his back window, eyes on the line of his yard. He could feel it, something about this wasn't just a mistake. It was planned. The next morning, a letter was taped to his door. Not mailed, hand-delivered, it had no HOA letterhead. Just a stamp that read board authorization. Inside was a typed notice. Dear resident, in accordance with the updated 2023 land use clarification, your northeast perimeter is subject to shared ingress access. This designation has been reviewed and authorized by the HOA president. No action is required on your part. HOA board. There was no signature at the bottom. Only Karen's printed name and the date. From 3 days ago, Mark took out his phone. Not to make a call, to start recording. He walked the edge of the property, filming the posts, the signs, even the flattened grass from Leo's truck. He didn't post it. Not yet. He'd learned a long time ago that when people move quietly, they're hoping you'll shout. He wasn't going to shout. He was going to wait. Watch, record. And next time Karen smiled across the street, he'd have more than just suspicion. He'd have proof. Because whatever this was, a mistake, a power play, or something worse, it had just started. And Mark wasn't the kind of man to let someone dig into his land. Without digging back, the morning after Mark received the unsigned notice, he woke to the sound of gravel crunching under tires. He looked out his window just in time to see Leo's truck pulling up again, only this time, the back was loaded with fencing panels and a wheelbarrow full of concrete bags. Mark dressed quickly, stepped outside, and leaned against his porch post as Leo unloaded. Still planning to set up shop. On my land. Mark called out. Leo didn't even look up. Not your land. Karen made it clear. It's HOA property now. If you've got an issue, take it up with her. Mark stared silently for a beat. Oh, I will. As Leo began mixing concrete for footings, Mark walked to the mailbox and found another letter stuffed in without a stamp. This one had a more polished look, colored HOA header, legal style formatting, and a laminated map folded inside. He opened it slowly. The map was a blurry copy, printed from a PDF, with thick black marker lines circling an oddly shaped section of the neighborhood. His property was on the edge, and sure enough, the section Leo had invaded was now labeled Community Easement Zone B. No coordinates. No official parcel numbers. Just vague zoning terms and a stamp of approval by HOA president next to Karen's name. There was a short message. Attached, as part of the updated community development plan, a shared garden path and vehicle access strip have been approved through Zone B. Please do not interfere with construction. Thank you for your cooperation. Mark couldn't help but laugh under his breath. Garden path. Vehicle access strip. Karen had turned a quiet corner of his yard into a shared driveway on paper, and now Leo was laying foundations for something Mark never approved. Instead of confronting them directly, he called the county office. After a few transfers, he spoke with a zoning clerk named Irene who sounded more annoyed than surprised. "This isn't the first time your HOA has tried this," she said. "They've submitted multiple modification attempts over the past year. None officially processed." Mark leaned in. "Can I get a copy of the current registered zoning map? And the survey file from my purchase?" "Already emailed," she said. "Let me guess. You're not the only one calling." That gave him pause. Back home, Mark opened his laptop. The county documents came in fast, crystal clear compared to the blurry mess Karen had sent. His parcel was untouched, completely private, no easements, no access clauses. The HOA's so-called Zone B didn't exist anywhere on the official map. He printed everything, stapled it, filed it under boundary lies. Later that afternoon, Mark saw Karen planting flowers in her front yard like nothing was going on. She caught his eye and called out across the street. "You didn't need to be so hostile to Leo," she said. "He's family. He's just trying to help the community. That corner of your lot's never been used. We figured it would be better shared." Mark walked to the edge of his lawn. "You figured wrong." She gave a little laugh, brushing dirt from her gloves. "The board supports it. It's been agreed. You'll see." Mark didn't respond. He just looked down at the stake Leo had planted, now surrounded by drying cement. Inside, he sat down at his desk and started creating a digital folder, HOA Encroachment Timeline. He labeled the first file Unlawful Entry. The second, Unauthorized Alteration. The third, Forgery Suspected. And in the last slot, he left the name blank, but in his mind, he already knew what it would say. Because if they thought a stack of copied maps and garden lies could steal his land, they had no idea what he was building in return. Mark had kept mostly calm until that night. It was close to midnight when he noticed the movement. A subtle flashing light through the back curtain, low, rhythmic, not headlights. He stepped outside, barefoot on the porch, eyes locked on the shadows near the tree line. That's when he heard it, the steady churn of a post hole digger. And beneath it, voices, two men talking, laughing. He moved quietly along the side of the house, keeping low near the fence. As he rounded the corner of the shed, he stopped. There, illuminated by a pair of portable work lights, stood Leo and another man, hauling wooden beams and measuring a trench that curved unnaturally deep into his backyard. They had tape lines running across the grass, a level set balanced across concrete forms. Piles of lumber stacked like a supply run for a deck or something bigger. Mark stepped back slowly. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it. This wasn't a mistake in paperwork or someone misreading a line. This was planned, ongoing, deliberate. They weren't testing the soil, they were building. He pulled out his phone and started recording. From the angle he crouched, he got a clear view of the work lights, the wood, and Leo's voice. Karen said, "By the weekend we can pour the slab. She's got the cement guys lined up already. Told me it was hers to give, said no one's touched this part of the lot in years." Mark whispered under his breath. "Slap." He didn't wait to see more. He returned inside, downloaded the footage, and saved it to 3 separate drives. Just in case, by morning, Leo's truck was gone, but the trench remained. So did the lumber. And someone had painted fluorescent orange marks on the grass, stretching to the rear fence. Mark opened the county map again. The back corner of his property was listed under his deeded land. No question. The intrusion was beyond any logical interpretation of easement, so why were they acting like it didn't matter? Later that day, he walked the perimeter again, this time in broad daylight, and noticed something else. Fresh survey flags. Not his. Different color, different stake. They curved behind the shed, creating a long arc parallel to the trench. An outline. That's when it clicked. They weren't just building a path. They were outlining a foundation, a structure. He checked the county permit board online. No requests filed for any structure matching the size. Nothing submitted under Leo's name. Nothing under Karen's, but there was one permit filed months ago under a company called Westpath Utility LLC. The project address. His mark blinked hard, then dug deeper. The LLC's registered owner was Karen's cousin, someone who'd never owned property in the neighborhood until the week Mark left town. They had created a shell company, filed fake HOA maps, built on private land, all while calling it community development. That night, Mark walked the line again, a tape measure in one hand and his phone recording in the other. The trench had deepened. Forms for concrete footings were staked into place. His own yard was being converted into something, possibly a shed. Possibly a small unit without any of it going through legal channels. The more he looked, the more he understood. They weren't asking for forgiveness because they never planned to ask for permission. And while they were sneaking in through the dark, Mark was preparing something of his own, not just a case, but a line that couldn't be crossed again. The next morning, Mark sat in his truck with a fresh coffee and a notepad already half filled with addresses, names, and permit numbers. His first stop was the county clerk's office, but not the front desk this time. He'd booked an appointment with the records division. No shortcuts. No summaries. He was done guessing. A woman named Darcy met him in the back office. She looked like she'd seen her share of property disputes and didn't flinch when Mark explained the situation. She pulled up the zoning registry and brought out the last 5 years of plats tied to his parcel number. They cross-referenced the tax maps, development overlays, and existing structure filings. All consistent. No easements. No shared use. Not even a temporary permit allowing access to his land. Darcy pushed her glasses up and turned the monitor toward him. Whatever they've built or marked out, she said, was never authorized. Mark took a photo of the screen. Then another. He asked about the document the HOA used to justify the new Zone B section. Darcy paused. They submitted that 2 months ago, she said. But it was flagged and sent back. It's not official. You can't assign easements that cut through a deeded residential parcel without owner consent. Can I get that in writing? Darcy handed him a printed copy with a timestamp and a red returned, denied note at the top. That was all he needed. Back at home, Mark pulled out every piece of paper Karen had left in his mailbox and compared it side by side with the official versions. The fonts were mismatched. The headers weren't even in the county's formatting. And the signature line. Just her name typed out in bold. She hadn't submitted new zoning. She'd fabricated the appearance of it to neighbors, to Leo, maybe even to herself. But she made one mistake in the margins of one of the HOA updates. There was a stray line that didn't match the formatting. It was a line from a deed transfer template, the kind lawyers use when splitting property titles. And it listed a beneficiary. West Path Utility LLC, Leo Barrett, manager. Mark leaned back in his chair. She wasn't just covering for her cousin. She was transferring a piece of what wasn't hers to him in writing and hiding it inside faux documentation that looked official enough to fool anyone not paying attention. And Leo, he wasn't just freelancing a garden path. He had commercial intentions. This wasn't about a driveway. It was about ownership. That night, Mark drove quietly around the neighborhood. He stopped at 5 properties that bordered HOA easements, and at each one, he saw the same thing. New posts, survey flags, small markers barely noticeable unless you were looking. They were trying this on multiple homes. The only difference, Mark had caught them before they finished. He went home, scanned every document he had, and compiled them into a digital timeline. One copy went on a drive. One went to the cloud. The last one, printed, sealed, went in a manila envelope labeled attorney for review. Then he did something Karen never expected. He filed for a permit himself. Not for a shed, not for a structure. For a perimeter barrier fortified, legal, and set to his deed's boundaries. He included the official county maps, notarized ownership, and Darcy's denial report of Karen's rezone request. No copies, no bluffs, just fact and foundation. If they wanted to draw false lines, they were about to meet the real one. Mark waited until just after 10 o'clock. The neighborhood had gone still. Porch lights were off. Karen's house was dark. Leo's truck was gone again. A white flatbed rolled into his driveway slow. No music, headlights cut at the curb. 2 men stepped out, nodding without a word. They worked for a private fencing contractor Mark had found 3 counties away. No HOA ties. No subcontractor overlaps. Cash deal. Discreet. Within 20 minutes, they were unpacking steel panels and silent drilling holes into the ground. This wasn't a fence, it was a declaration. 7-gauge steel, reinforced posts, motion-detecting floodlights, and a biometric entry gate that could only be unlocked by fingerprint. Mark wasn't just reclaiming property, he was sealing it shut. He'd pulled the permit 3 days earlier, right after receiving Darcy's stamped denial of Karen's fake easement. Everything about the build was clean and filed. No violations. No gaps. And he wasn't stopping at just one side. The panels stretched from the rear of his property, wrapping around the trench Leo had dug, then curved toward the side where Leo had planted his first concrete footing. The placement wasn't random, it was surgical. The barrier traced the exact legal boundaries listed on the deed, right down to the inch dot by the time the clock passed 1 a.m. The back line was already up. Mark stood quietly by the shed, arms crossed, watching the crew work. He hadn't spoken much since they arrived, only pointed once or twice. He'd memorized the measurements. He didn't need to second guess. Near 2 a.m., one of the workers handed him a small tablet. The system was ready, security grid armed, access restricted, cameras aligned. Mark tapped the screen once, then looked up at the shed. Then the trench. No one was coming through this way again. The next morning was quiet, birds' lawnmowers in the distance, but then came the sound of screeching tires. Leo's truck. He stopped hard outside Mark's driveway, threw the door open, and stormed down the sidewalk toward the shed. "Where the hell's my access?" he shouted. "What did you do?" Mark stood by the gate calmly, tablet still in hand. Leo rattled the steel. It didn't move. "You can't block a public right-of-way," Leo snapped. "It's not public," Mark replied. "It never was. And now it never will be." Leo turned, looking toward Karen's house, as if expecting backup. But her curtains didn't move, her door didn't open. "I'll call the police," Leo growled. "You should," Mark said, "because the only thing trespassing now is you." Leo stood frozen. There was a different weight in Mark's voice now, not anger, just certainty. He left after a few minutes, tires spitting gravel as he peeled away. Mark didn't flinch. He stayed outside, waiting, and sure enough, an hour later, a black and white cruiser pulled up. The officer stepped out, took one look at the new barrier, and then at the stack of documents. Mark handed him deed copies, county maps, the denied HOA rezoning request. After a short walk around and a few nods, the officer gave his verdict. "You're in the clear. Not a thing wrong here." Mark nodded, once. "That's what I figured." When the officer left, Mark sat on the front porch, watching Leo's empty worksite behind the barrier. The trench was still there. The wood still sat, untouched, but it was all on the wrong side now. And as for Karen, she hadn't shown her face all day. The barrier stood for 2 days, before Karen came knocking. Mark was pruning the hedges by his front gate when her voice rang out, clipped, tight, rehearsed. "You need to take that thing down." Immediately, he didn't turn, just clipped another branch. "What thing?" She marched up the walk like she owned the pavement, the structure, the wall, the illegal cage you've installed around community-designated property. Mark finally looked at her. No expression. "It's not illegal. And it's not yours." Karen waved a crumpled paper in her hand. "I've got authorization from the board." Mark held up a small remote. The gate behind him clicked. Locked. "You have paper you typed in your living room," he said. "I have a recorded permit, zoning verification, and a police file now documenting trespass. Don't bring me copies. I've already seen the originals." Karen's face shifted. The rehearsed poise cracked. Her fingers curled around the paper as if she wanted to throw it, but couldn't find the right moment. Then came the line Mark expected. "This is harassment." He almost smiled. "You're welcome to try and prove it." Karen stepped back, but not far. Her eyes darted toward the side of the property, where the trench remained now a useless scar carved into land she never owned. "You tricked the system," she snapped. "This wasn't about land. This was about control." "No," Mark said calmly. "This was about not being lied to." She spun on her heel and left without another word. But it wasn't over. Later that afternoon, 3 board members arrived. Mark watched from his porch as they stood outside the barrier, whispering, examining the structure like it was some kind of a fence. One of them, Dan, from the 3rd row of homes, knocked once and asked to speak. Mark let him in. Inside, Dan spoke quietly, nervous. "Karen said you were interfering with HOA designated infrastructure. Said you were blocking a shared utility project." Mark walked over to the dining table and placed 3 items down in front of him. The county-stamped zoning map. The original deed. A printed transcript of the permit rejection Karen received 2 months ago. Don didn't say anything at first, just stared. "You knew nothing about it, did you?" Mark asked. Don nodded slowly. "She told us it was a landscaping initiative, temporary. Community beautification. Mark tapped the map. She was selling off pieces of this neighborhood, one trench at a time. Dan looked shaken. She's already filed for 2 more access expansions, both near corner lots. Mark handed him a flash drive. That has the audio of Leo admitting Karen greenlit the dig and told him no one would check the records. Dan stood. This has to go to a vote. Do it, Mark said. Just make sure the neighbors see everything. By nightfall, the HOA meeting announcement went out. Emergency session. Board members required, homeowners encouraged. Mark didn't attend right away. He waited, stayed on his porch with a glass of iced tea while people trickled down the street toward the community hall. By the time he arrived, the room was already full. Karen sat stiffly at the front, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Her cousin Leo wasn't there. Dan stood up and cleared his throat. Before we begin, I'd like to share something from one of our residents. He inserted the flash drive, pressed play, and in front of 30 neighbors, Leo's voice echoed through the speakers. Karen said it was fine. She's got the board in her back pocket. Said nobody reads those deed maps. Once the concrete's in, it's ours. Karen stood slowly, red creeping into her cheeks. This is completely out of context, she stammered. That's sit down, someone said from the back. Mark didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The wall was doing the talking for him now. The room turned quiet after Leo's voice stopped playing. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from shock. It was the kind people feel when they realize they've been used. Karen stayed standing for a moment, frozen in place, eyes bouncing from face to face, as if waiting for anyone to speak up in her defense. No one did. Instead, Dawn turned from the table and faced the room. We've reviewed the zoning maps. We've seen the property deeds. And now we've heard what was said when no one thought they were being recorded. Another board member, June, cleared her throat. I'd like to formally motion to remove Karen as acting HOA president. Karen's head snapped toward her. You can't just. I can, June said. And I'm not the only one. Someone clapped. Karen's voice cut through it. That clip means nothing. You don't know the full context. Leo's always been dramatic. It was a misunderstanding. Mark stepped forward. Then explain the permits that were never filed. Explain the rezoning application that was denied 2 months ago. Explain why a construction trench appeared on private land while the owner was away. Karen's hands shook slightly as she fumbled for her phone. You think you're clever, don't you? You tricked everyone with your little barrier and your dramatic videos. Mark raised an eyebrow. All I did was protect what was mine. Another homeowner stood. Then another. And another. Voices started to rise. I got one of those fake easement notices too. She said it was for a playground extension. I nearly let them build a fence behind my garage. Karen looked around. Her control, the long, quiet grip she had on meetings, votes, and signatures was slipping fast. Don raised his hand. We're voting now. Show of hands. Remove Karen from the board. Effective immediately. One by one, hands went up, 20-3, then 30, then nearly the whole room. Only Karen's hand remained down. Dawn nodded grimly. Motion passed. Karen stared at the table, lips pressed tight. She didn't speak again. Just gathered her things, quietly and methodically, as if trying to hold on to some final shred of control. Then she walked out without looking at anyone. Mark stayed behind. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He just sat and listened as the rest of the meeting unfolded. Leo was reported to the Zoning Commission for unauthorized construction. The HOA's former records were ordered to be re-audited by a third party. And all proposed easement zone requests submitted under Karen's name were officially rescinded. Before the meeting ended, June turned to Mark. You saved more than just your yard, she said. You stopped something that could have spread to half the neighborhood. Mark nodded. That was the point. On the walk home, neighbors approached him one by one. Quiet, thanks. Questions about their own deeds. A few asked how much it cost to build the kind of barrier he'd installed. He didn't give exact figures. He just said, less than what I would have lost. That night, Mark stood beside the wall under the glow of its motion lights. The wood Leo left behind still sat untouched beyond the barrier. A forgotten pile from a plan that never finished, and while the surface looked still, Mark knew the real damage had already been done, not to his lawn, but to the grip Karen thought she'd never lose. What she didn't understand was that some walls don't just keep people out. They hold people accountable. Weeks passed. Karen's porch remained empty. No decorations, no HOA flyers clipped to mailboxes, no passive-aggressive notes tucked under trash can lids. Just silence. Her resignation went through, quietly filed after the board vote, and she hadn't attended a single meeting since. No apology. No explanation. Leo. Gone. His truck hadn't been seen in the neighborhood since the emergency session. The trench she left behind dried and cracked, weeds beginning to push through the edges. Every time someone walked past it, they glanced away like it was cursed, but Mark hadn't finished. Not yet. One morning, a white envelope arrived this time, from the county. Inside was confirmation. His boundary line adjustment had been approved. He'd filed it the week after the barrier went up. Not to expand, but to define. Every inch of his property had now been registered under a revised deed, reinforced by recent surveys and the confirmed denial of all HOA altered maps. The new file was stamped, recorded, and backed by a notarized letter. The HOA would never be able to claim a single inch again. But that wasn't the twist. A month after Karen's removal, the HOA sent out a newsletter announcing the formation of a community storage initiative. They were offering a small structure at the edge of the neighborhood for shared gardening tools and seasonal items, an idea they'd claimed Karen was pursuing before it all unraveled. Mark saw the irony. He waited, quietly then, just before the next meeting. He filed one more application with the county, to register a utility shed on the same plot Leo had tried to carve out for himself. The land was already his. The wall already covered it. And now, with the board in reform, no one objected. The permit sailed through. 2 weeks later, the shed was installed, sleek, secure, steel-sided. It looked almost industrial compared to the rest of the neighborhood, but no one dared complain. Not now. At the next meeting, Mark stood up and addressed the board. This, he said, holding up a photo of the shed, is the only structure that will ever stand on my line. It's legal. It's registered. And I'll be managing access personally. There was no argument. No protest. The board nodded in approval. Even June offered a half-smile. But what really landed was what Mark did next. He opened a sign-up list, community, tool exchange, free access to gardening gear, landscaping tools, even a chainsaw. He printed rules, managed inventory, made it easy. It wasn't just smart, it was tactical. He'd taken the very excuse Karen had used to justify invading his land, a shared gardening initiative, and turned it into something real, functional, and respected. Only this time, no cousin, no lies, no loopholes. Just integrity. Sealed in steel. The neighbors responded better than he expected. People who once ignored his yard now waved when passing. Some offered to help maintain the space. A few even dropped off tools to contribute. One man, a quiet veteran who rarely spoke, shook Mark's hand and said, "It's good to know someone finally drew the line." And just like that, the story ended not in conflict but in clarity, because in a neighborhood where control had crept in through signatures and smirks, it only took one person, one wall, and one relentless refusal to fold, to bring it all crashing down. And Mark. He didn't tell people how to protect their land, he just showed them how.